Morning, folks, and today's episode is called The Winklevoss Twins Assholes or Easy Targets. And it's a story I've always wanted to dig into because if you were to tell me that two guys who came up with the idea for what became Facebook had that idea very sneakily, more or less stolen from them, would then go on to get involved in Bitcoin at a time when it was valued at only $13, and then predict that it would reach $40,000 and were laughed at by many for that prediction, which turned out to come true, would become the first Bitcoin billionaires, would found a company that has striven to ensure that Bitcoin and digital currencies are regulated, and would attempt to take that whole sector out of the Wild West image that still casts a cloud over it. I would think that these two guys would be seen as heroes, the good guys. And yet, in many people's minds, the Winklevoss twins are the assholes. Why is that? It makes for a great story. So let's look into it. A quick reminder, while these shorter weekly episodes, released every Wednesday, are free for everyone, for just $1.99 a month, you get access to our co-hosted hour-long episodes released on the first of every month, where Keith and I do an even deeper dive into an incredible business story. Some of these hour-long episodes are still free in our back catalogue, so you can get a taste of what to expect. As well as getting access to these monthly co-hosted hour-long episodes released on the first of every month, behind the paywall right now, there are some additional fantastic bonus episodes. And we'll be adding more bonus content for subscribers regularly. Also, subscribers will get access to these weekly episodes ad-free, so you won't have to listen to me talk about this great subscriber program. It's great value for just $1.99 a month. You can subscribe via Apple subscriptions, Spotify subscriptions, or on Patreon using the link below, or go to patreon.com/Great Business Stories. Cameron and Tyler Winklevoss were born on August 21st, 1981, and grew up in a very affluent place in Greenwich, Connecticut, because their father, Howard Winklevoss, he was this very, very successful actuary, academic, and entrepreneur, and he was known for writing several financial books and founding both Winklevoss Consultants and Winklevoss Technologies, all specialising in retirement plans, endowments. And so from a very early age, the twins absorbed their father's relentless drive and his innovation. Now, Ben Mesrick, who has written some really, really fun books, and actually the movie The Social Network was based on one of his books, he spent a significant amount of time with the twins when writing another book of his called Bitcoin Billionaires. And he described Tyler as the more left-brained and analytical twin, while Cameron was known for being more empathetic and light-hearted. And Mesrick says that when speaking with the Winklevoss twins, it felt like you were conversing with a single person, because, as he said, they not only complete each other's sentences, they also actively think together. And their bond was built on this deep, deep sense of mutual trust, and of course strengthened by years of training, and we're going to get into the rowing in a minute, studying, and working side by side. And they also shared this very strong internal code, and this was an unshakable belief in doing what was right, regardless of how popular or unpopular the decision might be. And this wasn't self-righteousness. This is a deeply ingrained sense of fairness and integrity, which we'll dig into a bit more in this episode. Now, they were drawn to rowing as teenagers when they were 15 because they were inspired by a neighbour who rowed at Harvard. And the twins took up the sport and they showed exceptional promise. They were built for the sport, really, at 6'5", very strong. And by 1999, they had earned spots on the US Junior National Rowing Team, and they competed at the World Junior Championships in Bulgaria. And even as teenagers, they had this uncanny synchronicity in the boat. I'm guessing because they were so close in every way. It was described as a mirror image of power and technique, and it would become a hallmark of their rowing career. And of course, they brought this athletic prowess into Harvard when they arrived in 2000, and they joined the Varsity 8. And this crew of rowers was so dominant that they became known as the God Squad. They were called that because some rowers in the boat believed in God, while the rest believed they were God. So you could say that confidence wasn't in short supply. Now, as well as athletics, they became prominent figures in Harvard's elite social circles. They were members of this porcelain club. This is Harvard's oldest and most exclusive and most distinguished club. And they were also members of the historic, and I'm not making this name up, the Hasty Pudding Club. I mean, the names of these clubs. They were always impeccably dressed. They were self-assured. They were the embodiment of what you'd call the big man on campus. And as Mesrick later described, they were kind of the golden boys who wore suits into class, and they went through high society and navigated high society with ease. Look, in short, it's pretty easy to be prejudiced against the Winklevoss twins. They're the kind of people that are very easy to dislike. I dislike them based on the above descriptions. And it's not because of who they are as individuals, as people. It's because of what they represent. Now, in their junior year, the twins, together with Divya Narendra, a classmate of theirs, began developing an idea. It was for an exclusive online social network for Harvard students. Narendra was this economics major, and he first envisaged the concept in late 2002 because he was inspired by the early success of Friendsters and later in 2003, MySpace. And there were plenty of other sites like this coming out at that time. But instead of a public platform, their idea focused on exclusivity. Harvard Connection is what they initially called it, and it would require a harvard.edu email to join. So that instantly created this idea of elitism. And by late 2003, they had hired a few different college coders, but the development was very slow, it was very sluggish, because the coders weren't full-time. They were just students that came on board and they gave them a bit of money and they'd do a bit of programming and then they'd move on. But they wanted to accelerate progress, so they were looking for new programming talent, and one of their previous developers recommended a guy with a growing reputation for his coding skills. Enter stage right, Mark Zuckerberg. So Zuckerberg was already making waves on campus because just a few weeks before he was approached by the Winklevoss twins, he'd caused a stir with FaceMash. This was a hot or not style website that he built on a whim, apparently after coming home drunk one night. Now, when the Winklevosses and Narendra met with him in late November 2003, they laid out their vision. Harvard Connection would start at Harvard, then expand to other universities, using exclusive college email logins to keep each network tight-knit. Now, Zuckerberg seemed interested and agreed to help them build the remaining features. That, he said, I will finish the code for you. But almost immediately after joining the project, Zuckerberg began to withdraw. And his initial enthusiasm, it gave way to vague excuses, and then there was radio silence. And the twins and Narendra, they were getting frustrated by the delays. But what they didn't know was that on January 11, 2004, Zuckerberg quietly registered the domain thefacebook.com. And then on February the 4th, 2004, the Facebook was launched using the exact same model as Harvard Connection. Now, the Winklevoss twins and Narendra, they were stunned, and when they checked the Harvard Connection code that Zuckerberg had worked on, they found that it was barely functional. It was nowhere near completion. I mean, in short, Harvard Connection had been strung along and delayed, while Zuckerberg's nearly identical site launched first, rapidly signing up hundreds, then thousands of students as it launched in universities across the US and Canada. Now, the twins and Narendra, they did push forward and finally launched their site, which was now renamed ConnectU in May 2004, but by then it was too late. Facebook had already taken a dominant lead. Now, before taking their grievances to court, the Winklevoss twins and Narendra attempted to resolve the issue through Harvard's institutional channels. They even brought their case directly to Harvard's president, Larry Summers. And this is a scene that plays out in the movie The Social Network, but as we saw in the movie, their efforts went nowhere. Summers dismissed them in the private meeting, making it clear that the university wouldn't intervene. And while the movie does portray the twins as these preppy, waspy, big men on campus, which they were, the scene also gets one incident with Summers very, very right. for the twins, this was all about doing the right thing. Money really was secondary. And I know a lot of people will scoff at that. And believe me, I was skeptical as well. But it's clear from everything that I've read about them, and also by their very actions throughout their lives, that doing the right thing, this integrity that they have, it's very, very important to the Winklevosses. They felt that Zuckerberg had wronged them and he needed to be held accountable for stealing their idea and for duping them. And so in September 2004, they filed a lawsuit against Zuckerberg. Now, the next 3 years were consumed by legal procedural manoeuvrings, and both sides played hardball. In 2007, though, the conflict burst into public view because that fall, a Harvard alumni magazine published this bombshell of an article. It was called Poking Facebook, and it contained information from sealed documents from the case. This was emails, diary entries, instant messages, and there's some great examples here. In an instant message to a friend, Zuckerberg bragged, open quotes, "If you ever need info on anyone at Harvard, just ask. I have over 4,000 emails, pictures and addresses. They trust me, dumb fucks." Close quote. According to other leaked chats, Zuckerberg hacked into ConnectU shortly after it launched, and he created a fake profile for Cameron Winklevoss and filled it with white supremacist rhetoric. And then there was the Harvard Crimson incident. Harvard Crimson is a student publication. In 2004, when the twins had approached the student paper to investigate Zuckerberg's conduct, Zuckerberg reportedly went to the offices of the magazine to give his side. But when it became clear that the paper would publish the story anyway, and it wouldn't be very favourable to Zuckerberg, Zuckerberg allegedly hacked into the email accounts of Crimson staff because he was exploiting the fact that some of the students reused their Facebook passwords for their Harvard email accounts. In another leaked message, Zuckerberg wrote to a friend, open quotes, "You can be unethical and still be legal. That's the way I live my life." Close quotes. So Zuckerberg's boasts and his hacks, real or alleged, they painted this really damning portrait. As one legal expert noted, the details occupy a grey area legally, and perhaps they weren't a smoking gun, but they were still dangerous to Zuckerberg's case. And crucially, the narrative now, it was no longer just about ownership of a website. It was about the kind of person and company, and the person leading this company, that would come to define the digital age, because by this stage, Facebook was becoming the number one social network. Now, it all came to a head in February 2008 when a meeting was brokered between both parties. The meeting came about because after years of legal wrangling, the Winklevoss twins, they pragmatically decided that perhaps the best way to reach a settlement was to leave the lawyers outside of the room and that they would simply chat with Zuckerberg. Now, Zuckerberg agreed, but he had one condition. Citing security concerns, he insisted that he would only meet with one twin. Now, the twins were furious by this condition, but they complied because they just wanted to get on with it. A quick reminder, while these shorter weekly episodes released every Wednesday are free for everyone, for just $1.99 a month, you get access to our co-hosted hour-long episodes released on the first of every month, where Keith and I do an even deeper dive into an incredible business story. Some of these hour-long episodes are still free in our back catalogue, so you can get a taste of what to expect. As well as getting access to these monthly co-hosted hour-long episodes released on the first of every month, behind the paywall right now, there are some additional fantastic bonus episodes. And we'll be adding more bonus content for subscribers regularly. Also, subscribers will get access to these weekly episodes ad-free, so you won't have to listen to me talk about this great subscriber program. It's great value for just $1.99 a month. You can subscribe via Apple subscriptions, Spotify subscriptions, or on Patreon using the link below, or go to patreon.com/Great Business Stories. Now, behind the scenes, the Winklevosses, they knew they had some leverage and that Facebook had plenty of incentive to settle, because by this stage, Facebook was soaring. It had tens of millions of users. It had just gotten a $240 million investment from Microsoft, which valued it at $15 billion. But the Winklevoss lawsuit, it posed a serious threat because it threatened to undermine Facebook's IP and expose damaging internal messages. A loss, it could have thrown Facebook's future and Zuckerberg's control of Facebook into chaos. And so it was Cameron who was elected to go into that meeting with Zuckerberg. And it was in this very sterile glass room. And watching from the outside was Tyler then and all the other lawyers. And it looked like it was described as this corporate aquarium. So Cameron went in. Zuckerberg was sitting there apparently avoiding eye contact, and Cameron broke the silence. He began by acknowledging Facebook's extraordinary success. He said, "What you've built is incredible. The sort of innovation that happens maybe once in a generation." Now, he also gave a nod to their own progress because the twins were training for the Beijing Olympics. And Zuckerberg, to his credit, professed admiration for what they were achieving with the American rowing team. And Cameron said, "Look, Mark, let's bury the hatchet. Let bygones be bygones. We're not saying we created Facebook. We're not saying we deserve 100%. We're saying we deserve more than 0%. Zuckerberg looked up and said, "At least we agree on something." But despite the niceties, they had come to negotiate a deal after 4 very bitter years, and the resentment was always just under the surface. And while Cameron posited that Zuckerberg wouldn't have created Facebook if it hadn't been for the Winklevosses and Narendra's initial idea, Zuckerberg downplayed their role. He pointed that Friendster and MySpace had both existed before Facebook. And this went on for a while, and after much over and back in this kind of vein, Cameron eventually said, "Look," he said, "this could go on forever and it's not doing either of us any good. You've got a company to run and we've an Olympic team to make. Life is too short to keep going back and forth like this." Zuckerberg agreed. He held out his hand. Cameron shook it. Zuckerberg left the room, and lawyers from both sides put together a deal, literally handwritten on a 1 1/3 page term sheet. The deal was the Winklevosses and Narendra would relinquish all claims and transfer full ownership of ConnectU to Facebook. In return, they would receive a settlement valued at $65 million. Now, initially, the deal was all cash, but the twins insisted on stock, and eventually the package was split into 2 parts: $20 million in cash and 1.25 million shares of Facebook, which are valued at $45 million at that time based on Facebook's recent $15 billion valuation. Now, the deal was that both parties would walk away with no further allegations, no more lawsuits. However, over time, as Facebook's valuation continued to grow massively, the Winklevoss twins regretted the deal, and in 2010 they launched an ill-fated attempt to undo the settlement and demand more stock. But a federal appeals panel, they just flatly said no. They were upholding the deal, no more legal battles, that's it. Now, based on my research, the twins held on to their Facebook stock for some time. And as Facebook's valuation skyrocketed, of course, so did the value of their stake. Now remember, Narendra was also involved in this deal, but I wasn't able to find out when he cashed in his stock. According to Ben Mesrick, the twins eventually sold their shares for $500 million. So while they might not have been happy with the initial settlement, they played their cards well. And now I know some of you who are working the maths in your head will say, well, if they'd held on to their shares until today, they'd be worth 4 to 5 billion. But as we shall see, the Winklevosses put their money to very, very good use. Now, in the intervening years, the twins, they completed their economics degree at Harvard while training rigorously for the US national rowing team. Following the 2008 settlement, they turned fully to training and ultimately competed at the Beijing Olympics and finished 6th in the men's coxless pairs. In 2009, they enrolled at Oxford for graduate school and joined that university's prestigious Blue Boat. This is something that they had always aspired to do. And across both the US and the UK rowing circuits, they were known as hardworking, grounded teammates. And I couldn't find anyone from the rowing fraternity say a bad word about them, and I did look. Now, just on a quick side note as well, because in 2010, the Social Network movie was released, and I think the twins' reaction to it tells us something about their character. Both of them attended the premiere. I don't think anybody else who featured in the movie did. And rather than resenting their depiction as these preppy, waspy antagonists, they called it a great movie, one we can show our grandkids. And Tyler has been quoted as saying that strangers would sometimes approach him, outraged on his behalf, and Tyler would just shrug and say, "Dude, calm down. It's just a movie. We'll be okay." So again, I think that just says a lot about their character. Now, the twins first encountered Bitcoin in the summer of 2012. They were in Ibiza, and during the trip they met someone who introduced them to the concept of Bitcoin. Now, at this time, much of Silicon Valley were very dismissive of cryptocurrency. They saw it as this fringe obsession. But the Winklevoss twins, they liked it, and they made a very quiet and calculated play. Bitcoin was trading at just $13 when they first started investing in it. And within a year, they had gone public with their holding. They bought roughly $11 million worth of Bitcoin, amounting to, at that time, about 1% of all Bitcoin in circulation. Now, but they weren't buying into any hype. There wasn't any massive hype when they got into it. They were buying into a philosophy that they believed really had a future. As Tyler said at the time, open quotes, "We have elected to put our money and faith in a mathematical framework that is free of politics and human error," close quotes. Now, in 2013, Bitcoin rocketed from $13 to $750, and the twins predicted it could reach a $400 billion market cap, about 40,000 per coin. They were ridiculed in some quarters for predicting this, but it did just that in 2021. And while the market crashed dramatically in 2022, dropping below 20,000, it rebounded, going as high as 100,000 by early 2025. Now, in 2014, they launched Gemini. This was a digital asset exchange, and it had an ethos that ran totally counter to the libertarian chaos dominating crypto, even dominates it to this day, because Gemini embraced regulation. It became one of the first crypto firms to secure a trust charter from the New York Department of Financial Services. This granted it the same kind of oversight that traditional banking received. And as Cameron had said, open quotes, "You would never put your money in an unregulated bank, yet in crypto, that's a sad reality. We created Gemini so people could engage with crypto in a way that was as safe and as compliant as opening a bank account." Now, as Bitcoin surged to $20,000 in 2017, the twins' early $11 million bet, it turned into more than $1 billion. They became the first Bitcoin billionaires. And they used their stature to kind of shift the narrative around crypto. They helped reframe Bitcoin from a speculative gimmick into this serious financial asset. But their approach, it had limitations because compliance meant slower growth. While their rivals raced ahead, Gemini often and continues to lag in market share. But Tyler was unapologetic. He said, open quotes, "Gemini's philosophy of asking for permission, not forgiveness, is a first in the crypto industry." And they followed this up with advertising campaigns with slogans like "The revolution needs rules" and "Crypto without chaos." But it hasn't all gone smoothly because their biggest stress test came in 2022 with the launch and then the unraveling of Gemini Earn. This was a program which let users lend crypto to Genesis Global Capital for up to 7.4% annual percentage yield. And it initially thrived, but then came the FTX collapse and it triggered a cascade. I mean, Genesis, the company that Gemini was in partnership with, they were exposed to FTX and they froze withdrawals. Genesis eventually went into bankruptcy. That left 232,000 Gemini Earn users locked out of $940 million in crypto. And the fallout, it was immediate. There was lawsuits, regulatory probes. By May 2024, Gemini announced it had recovered 97% of users' assets, with the remainder expected within a year. But the reputational damage had been done and it was real. Like, Gemini had to pay a $37 million fine to New York regulators for risk oversight failures. Revenues plunged. Headcount was slashed from 1,100 to under 700, and the twins personally injected 100 million into the business to stabilise operations. Their estimated net worth, about 3 billion each now, thanks to Bitcoin's recent resurgence. But that had become a financial backstop for the firm. And even as Bitcoin has rebounded to over 100,000 in early 2025 and has settled to about 75,000 at the time of this recording, Gemini's US market share, it remains modest. Now, they have expanded overseas, but its compliance first model, while obviously the right thing to do, as I mentioned earlier, it puts it at risk in this very rapidly evolving and winner takes all cryptocurrency market. But these guys are resilient, they're smart, they're very calculated and strategic. And like their Bitcoin bet, they are planning long term. Now, I'm not an expert or a fan of Bitcoin or crypto of any sort, but my gut is telling me that if digital currencies are to have a long term future, then there will inevitably need to be more regulation, more oversight. So the Winklevosses are, in my humble opinion, they're heading in the right direction. Now, whether Gemini can survive and thrive over the coming years, that's a harder call to make. So, where do I stand on the Winklevoss twins? I think you kind of know by now. Look, they did come up with the initial idea for Facebook. And Zuckerberg did steal / take / borrow that idea and run with it. Now, I'm not saying for a second that the Winklevosses and Narendra would have built what Zuckerberg did. It needed someone like Zuckerberg, a coder who has this great instinct to pivot fast and adapt. But their concept, this exclusivity and rolling it out in universities, it was smart and it formed the foundation of Facebook's early success. That's undeniable. Now, the media's portrayal of them has, I think, mostly been unfair. When they settled with Facebook, many dismissed them as entitled rich kids. And I'll admit, I did too. It seems like a double standard applies here. While society is right to condemn snap judgments based on appearance or background, when it comes to privileged figures like the Winklevoss twins, we're given a free pass to be prejudiced. And look, sure, they've had advantages, but they made something of themselves as well. And I think most importantly and admirably, they've done it fairly and with integrity. I didn't think I'd end up liking the Winklevoss twins, but I do. And I think that's what makes this a great business story. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. And remember, if you have any comments, any corrections, or any story that you'd like us to cover, email us at gbspod.com. All the best, folks.